Morning, everyone, and happy Friday. My name is Maria Carla Chiquen, and I am the Executive Director of CasaCuba. I would like to thank you all for joining us today for Perspectivas, a series which CasaCuba is so proud to present in partnership with the College of Business at Florida International University. Before we begin, I would like to share a bit about CasaCuba. CasaCuba is a historic initiative to develop a leading cultural center and think tank for the study of Cuba and the celebration and preservation of the Cuban heritage. CasaCuba has secured a prominent site at the entrance of the FIU main campus to build an iconic facility and received significant philanthropic support towards the upcoming design and construction phases, including prestigious grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Knight Foundation. Our future home will feature galleries for interactive exhibits, classrooms to teach FIU's more than 70 courses on Cuba, and a state-of-the-art venue for Cuban events, artistic performances, and dynamic programming such as Perspectivas. Perspectivas represents CasaCuba's vision to connect the past, the present, and the future of Cuba and the Cuban community from around the world. This program features prominent Cuban business leaders for intimate conversations on their Cuban roots and family story, their inspiring ascent to their present success, and their take on the future of their industries and our community at large. In these conversations, across the many individual stories of leadership, there is always a common inspiring element: the Cuban spirit of resilience, innovation, and grit. Perspectivas is just a taste of what you will experience at CasaCuba. Today's conversation will explore leadership with perspectives from our very own Ángel Gallinal, fellow at Harvard's Advanced Leadership Initiative, and Al Prieto, managing partner of the New York region and managing partner of the board and CEO practice at Egon Zehnder. They will be introduced by our moderator, Natalia Martínez-Kalinina. Natalia is an organizational psychologist and technologist focused on merging innovation, entrepreneurship, and impact. Most recently, she served as the leader of the expansion of the Cambridge Innovation Center to Miami. Natalia is also the founder of Awesome Foundation Miami, Aminta Ventures, and the Immigrant Powered Initiative. She holds a BA in psychology from Harvard University and a master's in organizational psychology from Columbia University. I would like to thank Natalia, Ángel, and all three extraordinary leaders for coming together in conversation this morning. Thank you also to our friends and partners at the College of Business and the CasaCuba team for their hard work behind the scenes to coordinate this event. And thank you all for tuning in. I hope to see you at future events, and I invite you to get involved in the historic, once-in-a-lifetime effort to build our CasaCuba. There are many ways to support the project and become a founder, and we need your help to make this dream a reality. Thank you and enjoy.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Maria Carla. Welcome to everybody who's joining us today for one more installment of Perspectivas. I want to echo thanks to CasaCuba. I want to echo thanks to the FIU College of Business, as well as to everyone who's joining us on this Friday and who's choosing to spend their Friday morning with us. We hope it is an inspiring conversation to send you off into the weekend. I want to, just as a brief logistical note, let our participants know that we will be kind of launching into a moderated Q&A. If you want to put any questions that you have, if you want to start putting them into the Q&A kind of button that is available in Zoom as we go, you don't have to save them towards the end. You can put them in as they occur to you. I will be keeping an eye on that, and I will try to weave them in during the course of the conversation. And we will definitely have a more audience-focused Q&A towards the end in case some of them don't work with the flow of what we wanted to discuss over the course of the conversation. So for anyone joining us, this is absolutely a participatory dialogue, and so questions that you have, comments that you have, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. And Ángel and Al, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you both today. So I'm going to ask you all to turn your cameras on, and we can kick off with our introductions. Yes, wonderful.
Good morning. Good morning, Natalia.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, today's topic I'm very excited about, in part because I'm an organizational psychologist, and as part of that, obviously, I spend a lot of time thinking and advising and engaging topics that focus on leadership and leading teams and leading dynamic teams. Today's environment in 2020, which we'll get to talk about in a little bit as well, has put this idea of leadership and evolving leadership and leadership in times of uncertainty really on the table. And so I imagine that folks joining us today are really intrigued to hear your thoughts and your learnings on this. And so let's kick us off by setting the stage. Let's start with an introduction, because both of you have storied and really interesting histories and perspectives. So tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, your personal trajectories, kind of your respective current roles, anything fun that you want to tell us. Obviously your Cuban heritage, anything you want to feel kind of pepper in there is very welcome. So let's kick us off.
Sure. So Al and I drew straws beforehand, and he decided that I would go first. So. But I want to thank you again, and I want to thank Maria Carla and all the folks at CasaCuba and FIU for putting this program, this initiative together, and specifically for the work that you've done in getting us together as a panel. My story is hopefully not a complicated one, but I think it's important that you get the right context in order to understand my views on leadership. So I was actually born in Santa Clara, Cuba. I came to this country when I was 5 years old. This was in the late 60s. So I came in a program that some of you who are on the call may remember as the Freedom Flights. And we initially actually moved to Dallas, Texas, but then my parents saw the light, and they decided to come back to Miami to be with the rest of the family that was here already. I grew up a product of public high school and public schools. And one of the things that I learned early on was the value of hard work and just trying to get, ahead, learning a new language and all that. I was fortunate to come out of my high school and be accepted to Harvard University. And so I went there. I graduated with my undergraduate degree with a major in economics because I felt at the time it was something that would help me understand the world and business in general, which was where I was, thinking that I might have a future in. And so coming out of college, I joined a very well-known and very well-respected institution down here in Miami that was called Southeast Bank. So I cut my teeth in a traditional corporate training program within a large bank, commercial bank at the time. And I was very happy there, and, learned a lot, especially around just business and financing and cash management. I was getting promoted, and I was pretty happy, but I felt there was a need to go even further. And so about 4 years into that, I decided to apply for an MBA. And I was fortunate enough to get selected to the Harvard Business School MBA program. So I went there, returned back to Boston, which is a town that I love, by the way. It's the only other town I would consider living in besides Miami, and got my MBA. And when I graduated at the time, Latin America, as those of you who are familiar with the region know, has had a number of sort of ups and downs over the years, and it was kind of on one of those cycles up. So here's a Spanish-speaking, culturally acclimated individual coming out with an MBA. So that was, just a perfect opportunity for me to further my career at that point in time. And so I took a job with Disney coming out of business school. I worked in their consumer products organization, and we were essentially trying to promote and develop the brand further in Latin America. So cool job, great fun. You can imagine, being on the inside of an organization like Disney, you learn a lot about the inner workings of what it takes to make that magic happen. But I'm a big basketball fan, and at some point in time, I learned that the National Basketball Association had similar designs on growing its brand in Latin America, and they were starting an office here in Miami as well. And so I went for it. I applied, and I was fortunate enough to get called there. And I spent 5 years there, and we were on a great ride. This was the sort of the Michael Jordan dream team era for those of you who are basketball fans. And so, we were going down into the region, we were selling our programming, we were developing marketing partnerships with great sponsors like Coca-Cola and Sprite, Nike, et cetera. And we, also brought the game into the region, frankly. I was proud that during my time there, we actually staged the first ever regular season game in Mexico during that time. So learned a lot about leadership and about management through a very well-known guy named David Stern, who was the commissioner of the NBA at the time. He just passed away at the beginning of the year, this year. Incredibly fascinating individual. If you got time to, if you had time to spend with him. And then I was minding my own business, and one day I got a call from a former business school friend of mine, and there was an organization called Egon Zehnder, which had been very successful at doing executive search and management consulting for high-level positions. And they had started in Switzerland and grown over the years, but they had never filled in their map completely in the US. And they were looking for someone to help them open up their Miami office. So, it was one of those complete sort of, is someone trying to punt me? Are they trying to play with my head here? Because I was really enjoying the work at the NBA. But after a lot of discernment, I decided to make that move. And, I spent the next nearly 20 years there. I met people like Al, who's on the call as well, and had the privilege and the fortune to work with some incredible leaders, both not just with our clients that we worked with, but also the individuals that we recruited for our clients, and also the people within our own organization. And just learned a lot about, what it really takes to make great leaders, what distinguishes, good from great, and transformative leadership. Was fortunate enough to be elected a partner there, ran practices, worked a lot on internal development of our own consultants and mentorship programs as well. So ran the gamut, and a great firm where you can reinvent yourself from time to time, and very happy. But a couple of years ago, I decided to make a different kind of move. I was about to turn 55, and my father had passed in early 2018. And there was kind of a wake-up call where I wanted to figure out, okay, what am I going to be doing for the next several years? And I heard about a program at Harvard called the Advanced Leadership Initiative. The Advanced Leadership Initiative is the third stage in higher education, and it's basically designed to unleash the potential of experienced leaders to help solve society's most pressing challenges. So it was something that just, was calling to me. And again, I, went through a process that was pretty thorough, and was fortunate enough to be selected. I spent all of last year back in Boston going through this program with some incredibly talented leaders and learning what it means to go from, being in traditional organizations to thinking about how you're going to help transform society and the world at large, and do it in a way that's different. That's why they call it advanced leader, because you're at the stage where you have to take what you're doing and sort of figure out a new model and a new way. And a lot of times you're doing it with much more limited resources than you've had in traditional organizations. So we ended last year with that program. I came back to Miami. I'm working on a number of different things, primarily focused in the nonprofit sector, and in large part, the intersection of two things that are very near and dear to me. One is my faith. I'm a practicing Catholic. And the other one is my concern and my interest in providing humanitarian aid for the people in Cuba. So it's kind of coming back full circle in a lot of ways. That's where we are. Obviously, a lot of things have happened in the last 6 to 7 months. And we can get into some of that as it relates to leadership. But thank you again for this opportunity. I hope I didn't go too long.
So I guess I'll chime in after my good friend Angel. Again, thanks to CasaCuba for the invitation. Really great to join with all of you. My story is that I was actually born in the United States, 1964. My parents had immigrated in the counter-revolution, 1962, but I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. So I did not grow up, if you will, in a Latino community. And my parents, when they immigrated from Cuba, they're like, we're in America. We want to make a real, just make a change, make a break from Cuba. And so it was a fascinating time growing up, because I grew up in as I call it, Louisville's a town of 1 million people, but there were only 200 families of Latino descent. But in our home, we spoke Spanish. We cooked Cuban food. I make a mina arroz con pollo, and so there was this culture inside my house, and with our very close friends in the Latino community, but when I walked out of the house, I was a kid in Kentucky, right, in the Midwest, in the South. Lovely place to grow up, wonderful people. And interestingly, my mom now, who's at ripe old age of 82, after living in the New York area to be close to her grandchildren, has moved back there. So this is very much home. And if you go to Louisville, Kentucky now, I'm very happy to say there are like 7 Cuban restaurants. There's a thriving Latino community. It's amazing how it's changed. I mean, it really is. So I think it's, you know, that sort of, I think that kind of story is how like the United States is really evolving now. When we look at Latino communities across the United States, it's really, really different. And my hometown's part of that. So my journey was one, definitely not a linear journey. Sometimes in leadership, people describe career journeys. It used to be the career ladder, right? You sort of pick what you want to do and you just sort of go up each rung of the ladder. And one good client, a CEO of a major company, shared with me a few years ago, he says, you know, these days careers are not career ladders. It's more like a career jungle gym. You go one side, you make one move, you go sideways, you go another move. And well, you know, either it was foresight or I wasn't bright enough, but my career was definitely a jungle gym. I did not do a linear path. After I went to undergraduate at a regional state school, Western Kentucky University public school, I went to medical school and almost became a doctor. I was 3 years in medical school and decided that, well, it's just not for me. And which was a pretty dramatic move. I joke that my mom still says to me, I don't think she's still forgiven me. She says, you know, you would have made a great doctor. You know, it was one of those decisions in my life to say, hey, you've got to like be true to yourself in terms of what you do. And I stay close to the healthcare industry though. These are one of these things in life that some of these early experiences sort of stick with you and just in a different way. So my whole business, I had a business then career in the pharmaceutical industry. I actually founded a company, moved to Atlanta, founded a small company. We raised venture capital, grew the company, and we did research, clinical research for pharmaceutical companies, developing new drugs. And I moved to Atlanta with my business. This was in the early 90s. And actually, our little firm, we did a lot of research on the HIV drugs that you see today that are very successful today. That's actually what we focused on, was what they call infectious disease research. So was an entrepreneur and in true Cuban fashion. You know, we grew that business and ended up selling it. And then new chapter in my career was that I moved to London and for a variety of personal reasons, and then really started adjusting to living in Europe. And it was during that period of time and part of that adjustment that I decided to go to business school. And again, this is one of these interesting things. I was 36 years old. I'd run a few businesses, but I'd never taken a business class in my life. So I thought, maybe I should like learn a little bit about this. So I went to London Business School, fabulous school. And it was after London Business School that then actually our Angel and I's firm, Egon Zehnder, actually recruited me to an executive role at a big pharmaceutical company, AstraZeneca. And I was put in charge of AstraZeneca's business across Central Eastern Europe, 14 countries. This was early 2000s. And it was a fascinating time because it was before EU accession for several of these countries. And this is again where it was interesting, my Cuban roots, my roots of being, if you will, a minority in a broader population really came to play, because it's that understanding of people that have different perspectives. As I would fly to Russia, or I would fly to Poland and meet with teams in Poland, or whatever one of those countries, is that I was used to dealing with people who were English as a second language. And so little things like learning how to slow down my speech, which, as we all know, is difficult for a Cuban. But in terms of communicating with people, understanding just different perspectives. I found that I never would have thought that growing up as a Cuban American, that, you know, in the middle of Russia or in Poland, that actually this background of having a different background helped me to feel comfortable, and those around me feel comfortable with that. I could relate to them a bit more. So did that, moved back to the United States. My wife and I, my wife's just a retired banker, very successful banker. We had met in London. We had started a family, and my wife comes from another very strong cultural background. She's a Brooklyn native, Italian-American girl again. So when we started our family, they're like, you know, I want to get back to New York and be around our big, crazy, wonderful family. So we moved back to New York after 6 years in London. And like Angel with our firm, I get this call, you know, my firm had placed me in my last job. I thought I was going to be for a new job. And one thing led to another. I joined Egon Zehnder in late 2004. And focused mainly on the healthcare industry for many years in the firm, led our global healthcare practice, so on and so forth, a lot of work with the pharmaceutical industry. And then about 4.5 years ago, I took on the leadership of the New York office. And it's just in terms of the phases of your career, you know, one of the things for me that was a difficult shift when I was used to being a general manager and an individual that ran businesses, to then moving to being a consultant, like you are at Egon Zehnder, and a consultant to very high-level executives, which is great. But it was a big shift for me. It was unusual not to be the boss, if you will, or the general manager. But after I'd made that shift, I started really enjoying it. And when I stepped into my role, when I was asked to lead the New York office 4.5 years ago, it was one of those things that, aside from advisory, it was a chance to, if you will, sort of resurface some of those past experiences in terms of leading teams, building teams and such, both internally. And it's been a wonderful run. The office has grown a lot. We're soon going to be the largest office in the firm. But it was during about, sort of like Angel, about we're roughly the same age, and a little bit, almost 2 years ago, about 1.5 years ago, and similar to how I got reconnected to something that sort of hit me with my roots. And it was, we were doing a search, a board search for a huge company, let's say a Fortune 10 company. And I wasn't doing the search, but a couple of my colleagues were doing the search. And at the time, I was also wearing the hat of the US head of our board practice. And I caught an email chain going back and forth, and they said this board, they want to find a Latino director. And this is a company that's very consumer facing and such. Let's put it, it's a household name. And one, the shock to say, oh my God, this company doesn't have a Latino director when on their board, when probably 40% of their customer base is Latino. And so that sort of shocked me. And what shocked me even more, and a bit embarrassed me, was that the two partners that were leading the search, they said, I caught this email chain going back and forth. It's like, how can we, Egon Zehnder, the most global and international search firms, how can we not have a readily identifiable base of qualified Latino director executives that we can readily point to in our database? And I read that, and I was shocked, and then frankly embarrassed. And one thing led to another, and that led me to see that, are there any organizations that are trying to promote Latino diversity on corporate boards? And I did some research, and there's a small group called the Latino Corporate Directors Association. And I called up the president. I called a couple of directors that I knew that were involved with it, and then I called the president, and this was middle of 2018, and said, hey, let's discuss your mission. And I said, wow. And then we talked about it. I said, that sounds great. And I'm like, all right, we're in. And she's like, dear friend Esther Aguilera. And she's like, what? I'm like, we're in. Egon Zehnders all in. It's like, you need sponsorship, you know? And it's like, well, yeah, we're going to hold our annual meeting, our third annual meeting, hosted by Baker McKenzie in Chicago, and eminent law firm in Chicago. It's like, yeah, that'd be great. And well, that one thing led to another. And our firm has developed a wonderful partnership with the Latino Corporate Directors Association over the last couple of years. And for me, it's been something of a, it's been a great professional journey, because it's an area where we as a firm can make an impact, not only for our business. Listen, it's great business that we have a differentiation in the market of being able to do board work with a different angle. But actually the most gratification has come from, actually for me, it was the first time in my life at age 54 that I was around in the Latino community. with people of my age. You know, we have very similar backgrounds, whether we're Mexican American, Colombian American, Cuban American. There's so many commonalities of our stories, our personal stories, and it's just been wonderful. I've made many friends through this, and it's just continued to blossom now. And so it's been really rewarding. And this is something that, again, at age 56, I feel more connected to my roots than probably I ever have. And in the United States now, when we look at everything we're going through, certainly we're very sad as a country in terms of racial tensions, the importance of understanding that we're a country composed of a mix of individuals, of a mix of backgrounds, and that it's so important to understand our commonalities and crossovers, and also while holding our heritage, is just super important. It's super important. So it's become now for me very much a mission, a personal mission. It's a very gratifying personal mission. It ties to what my firm does. And so I found this wonderful sweet spot of where it crosses over. So that's my sort of story up till today. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing. I think kind of in my experience, and well, my personal experience definitely has been more of a jungle gym in my dynamic. And so thank you for sharing. You know, you can, I think it was Steve Jobs, you can always connect the dots looking backwards. And so it's always useful, especially for some of our participants who are students at the university, to think through, kind of to look forward from a little bit of that perspective. So thank you for sharing all the different complementary pieces of that. So, okay, jumping right in, a couple of kind of easy softballs just to set the conversation up. So tell us a little bit about kind of, everybody has their own leadership style, their own kind of leadership philosophy. So tell us a little bit about kind of your own leadership style and any kind of guiding principles of your philosophy, how you approach leading teams and leading organizations. Whoever wants to start.
I'll start my approach, which, you know, again, you kind of look backwards and you kind of see where you're at. But I think consistently over time that it's been focused more on what is described as servant leadership. So my main goal is really to serve and to help others and to help them develop and really put their needs, you know, if you will, ahead of mine. So everything that I've tried to do is, you know, are the people that I'm working with, are they, you know, better? Are they wiser? Are they freer, you know, because they're working with me? So I never consider myself to be a quote unquote boss, you know, someone, but really someone that could help them. And as I think back, you know, the people that helped me most were the ones that helped me realize my own potential. So I guess servant leadership is the way that I would describe my overriding principles.
I'd say for myself, it's, I would describe it as authentic leadership, from a perspective that I care a lot. I care a lot about our team, the people I work with, and I let it show. And when I say by authentic is then I'm very imperfect. And so, you know, I lead, and people that work with me and appreciate working with me over time, they appreciate the authenticity and care. And again, very aligned to Cuban. I'm incredibly passionate, driven. But sometimes my passion will push me to like, hey, maybe press too hard or have too strong a voice. Over time, I've learned to catch that when I do it. But because it's rooted in authenticity, those that work with me closely, they understand. And and it's another element of what Angel talked about, servant leadership. I mean, where I gain the greatest joy as a leader, whether it be working with clients or working internally, building our team, it's just to see success in others. It is the thing that fuels me. I mean, I gain just a huge amount of satisfaction, psychic satisfaction from seeing others. And I think seeing others grow. And I've just seen how both with our clients and our firm is, if you are an authentic leader, you invest in your people, the business takes care of itself.
Yeah, I would agree. I think especially in customer facing, indirect or direct type of organizations, whether they're for-profit or non-profit, I am a fundamental believer that everything that emanates from a core, an individual core of the people that are employed or the stakeholders that interact with the organization ripples outward. So I agree with you both. What has been kind of a particularly challenging lesson or experience for you along your leadership journey? And conversely, what has been kind of a leadership moment or lesson that you're particularly proud of?
Angel, you want me to lead? So I'll jump first on this one. Well, I've got to tell you, it's very recent. Leading our office during COVID, and particularly in New York, where actually, fortunately, we made the decision to close our New York office 2.5 weeks before Governor Cuomo shut down New York. You know, leading the team through a time of a lot of fear was something that, you know, and doing it virtually like this brought a lot of learnings, a lot of learnings that actually are really interesting. You know, our office is about 120 people. And I think we all feel we're closer now. Paradoxically, we're closer now that we're not in the office together than we ever have been. The second piece that's been a learning, and again, not by design, is again, the terrific racial unrest, the terrible racial unrest that arose post George Floyd. Well, as it turns out, it hit my office particularly hard. Our office is 71% diverse. The first, I'm not proud to say it, but the first Black part in our 56-year history, the first Black partner of our firm was elected from our office, and the first Black female partner of the firm was elected from our office. And so, you know, after George Floyd, that hit us incredibly hard. I mean, they hit people personally, deeply. And my learnings through this is actually my perspectives. I've just shared before about my Latino heritage and the importance of connecting with my roots and the importance of promoting Latino diversity, for example, in a boardroom or an executive suite. But this is really, I never thought as deeply about the experiences of other minorities and what they've gone through and what their journey has been. And it's been an eye-opener, and it's changed my views, I hope in a good way. And actually, I talk about the Lincoln Corporate Directors Association. We're actually, and the directors on that association that are involved in that association actually realized this and said, we talked about it. We said, you know, we want to promote Latino diversity, but at the same time, it's really important to promote diversity more broadly. And so now what you see is that actually they formed a diverse directors coalition that we're also very involved with. And so my learnings over the past, just very recent past, is that, you know, to continue to keep your aperture open as to the experiences of others, and to really question yourselves in terms of your own either overt or unconscious biases, and that you can support and promote the mission of your culture, your heritage, your community, but at the same time in doing that, actually be very sensitive to those other communities, particularly in the US. So that's been my real learning. I find myself reflecting on my own thinking historically. It's to me, it's been one of the most impactful things that's happened in my career.
Yeah, for me, I guess my challenges over the years is, you know, at some point in time, you've done the job that someone working with you has. If you're in an organization long enough, you've seen the jobs and you know what it takes to do those things. So I think for me, what I always have to sort of remind myself is, I know what I know, but do others know what I know? And how do I make sure that I impart that? And they shouldn't, I shouldn't assume that just because I've done the job that they know how to do it. And then second of all, that I'm telling them, what's my view on it. And with that also comes just knowing how to be adaptable. You can become very myopic in the way things get done because you're doing it. Somebody comes to you with a different approach and you're like, well, no, that's not the way you do it. And so you have to be open, that there are other good ideas and they all don't emanate from you. In fact, the best organizations, I've learned over time, generate ideas and innovation from across a range of individuals from entry level all the way to the top. So I think that's been a great challenge to sort of keep present in mind as I've gone along. In terms of successes, I mean, over the last 20 years or so working with the firm, there's too many in terms of the individuals that we've placed and the organizations on which they've had impact. It would do injustice to name, any single one. But what I can tell you is a personal, real success for me, and it kind of relates here to FIU, is several years ago, I was looking for a new administrative assistant. And someone recommended to me a woman named Jennifer Rivero, now known as Jennifer Gooding. At the time, Jennifer had been working with your former president, Mitch Mydeek. And she came to work with me as my assistant. And Jennifer was one of those people that just wanted to grow, and she, wanted to go beyond her job, and she wanted to learn the ins and outs of the organization. So, I can't take credit for all the success that she's had, but I can tell you that she was the kind of person that you looked at and you said, someone that you want to invest in. And so it was a real pleasure and a real treat to watch her grow from that initial job in the organization to now, when she called me about 2 months ago and told me I've just been accepted into our partner level consultant track, which means that, we see, or the firm sees her as a future partner. So that to me is an indication that, doesn't matter where you start, you can get there, with a lot of hard work and obviously some good fortune, but, a real amount of resilience and persistence to, sort of echo some of the topics that we talked about earlier.
I'm smiling because I'm very happy that I have a fellow Cubana that's on the partner track there. So she's amazing. I can a testament to that.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think, I understand kind of, you can't take full credit for it, but I do think there's kind of traces of the benefits of facilitative leadership and the success of other people, of the people around you, whether they be your peers or your subordinates or, other constituents. So I think that's really great. Thank you for sharing. A little bit of an abstract question, but double clicking on the moment that we're living with in terms of COVID. I think, when we think of leaders, I think there's kind of different energies that different people emanate. I've definitely been I've had and looked up to leaders that manage a different balance between how they're optimistic about certain things, how they're realistic about others, how they communicate kind of that line. I think I've been fortunate not to engage too often with leaders that kind of communicate cynicism or pessimism, but I know that they're out there, and I've had the kind of colleagues who've had bosses of that nature or company leaders of that nature. So kind of where do you sit on this line of optimism, pessimism, realism in terms of how you communicate as a leader? And especially kind of how has that changed or been nuanced over the course of 2020, where we've obviously been in crisis mode?
Yeah, I guess for me, I tend to lean towards, so I'm an optimist by heart, but I'm also a realist. So, for me, the guiding principle has always been, whether I was someone who leading or whether I was the person who was looking for leadership, is, tell me what's going on, be transparent with me, give me as much information as you can. Obviously, I know that in organizations, you can't reveal everything, but give me the information so that I know where I stand. I know where the organization is heading. Where do you want me to go? Paint for me the sort of the path that you think that we're on, so that I can adapt to those realities. To tell me that everything is fine, is great, and be as optimistic as you want. But, at some point in time, if this continues on, you can't operate with the business as usual paradigm. So, I have a 23-year-old daughter. She's just starting out her career. She works for a Big Four public accounting firm. And, we've had a lot of conversations about this in the last 6 months. So far, her firm has been very transparent in terms of what's going on. They've told them about, raises or not, or none thereof, actually. They've told them about, keeping jobs, but they've also been real. It's like, our clients are being impacted. So at some point in time, we're going to have to reevaluate everything. So I think that there's a good mix of that, at least for me. Those are the principles that guide me and give me the energy that I need to be successful. And I think that's where I think leadership does make a difference. You have to provide that energy for people working in an organization. And some people do that better than others, frankly. So
I think just echoing and sort of building on this point, one, the communication and the connection required from leaders in this environment, it's intense. I know for me as a leader, it's been intense. I first started with bi-weekly town halls, 120 people joining these calls, and weekly town halls, and to talk about the state of the business, how we continue to work through it, lean into it, our commitment as a firm to all of our employees, but then at the same time being pragmatic of saying that, hey, it's up to us to guide where we end up through all of this, and we all need to lean in. And it's interesting when sharing with a level of frankness that Angel mentioned in terms of the business situation, the difficulties of the situation, and just by communicating and everybody leaning in and communicating, it's interesting. People are going above and beyond. We were worried sometimes in the COVID environment. Again, you can imagine New York, New Jersey. I mean, people have people around them that are dying. It's very real. It's shocking. And you have town halls where, or one-on-ones, constantly I'm on one-on-ones, and you see people's emotions going up and down, understandably so. But you stay consistent with it. You stay consistent with the engagement. And what's been a wonderful thing that's like blown us away is people are leaning in. Everybody from our assistants who say, like, what can we do for the business? To analysts that have just come out of college and then are working in our analyst group. So these are individuals that would, let's say, a recent graduate from FIU, right? And sitting in our analyst pool. And instead of saying, okay, here's my job, this is what I do in the organization, it's like, what can I do to help the firm bring business in? It's been a wonderful thing, and frankly broke through barriers that we had seen before, just perceptions, right? Not real barriers, but perceptions. And that through engagement, through authenticity, through just high touch, really the team, it's amazing how they banded together to go through, and we're exceeding what we thought we would have achieved before. And it's a real collective ownership, collective pride that, we've done that. Now, I think the challenge for leaders is how do you maintain that in this environment? And that now with the leaders that we work with, even with ourselves, is that, all right, we've made it through this first wave. We sort of get what the new normal is. This is whatever our business is, good or bad, this is what it is. But how do we maintain engagement and pace going forward? That's an unknown right now. That's an unknown. And so these aspects of that we've talked about, in terms of our culture, resilience, grit, all these things, well, to have that resilience, to have that grit, you've got to have that, that sense of that intrinsic true north that keeps your energy up when things are really tough. It's challenging, right? As we keep going through this a challenging time. But anyways, I'll stop. But this is what I've seen certainly as a leader internally in our firm, and then when I see it with our clients and some of the things that there's been successes, but at the same time, very much the concerns of the unknown. But one thing that's consistent, it is we have seen a general flattening of organizations. You know, the CEO is on Zoom from his house, just like the assistant is, or just like everybody else. So there's been a virtual flattening of organizations. Now, I think we all know hierarchy is going to come back to play, but it is a snapshot in time that's really unique. That's another dynamic that's going on right now that's very different that's ever existed, is that kind of flat to virtual connections.
Yeah, I mean, kind of double clicking a little bit on that, I'm curious, kind of Angel, for any thoughts that you have on and we kind of preempted my next question already, which is great, on this kind of how has the leadership paradigm changed during this moment of crisis? Has it changed? How has it changed? Are we redefining the expectations that we have of leaders and leaderships across our organizations? Or is this just a heightening of what we already expected? It just looks different.
I think what Al says is right. You know, I think people are learning how to operate in this new environment. You know, obviously businesses are looking to see how, you know, why they exist and what they do, and does it make sense going forward. And, you know, I worked a fair amount of time at the end of my tenure at the firm with a hospitality organization. And you talk about an industry that's been, you know, really hit hard. But in all that darkness, if you will, there's some silver linings too. I mean, the hospitality firms that I think are going to succeed are learning how to reinvent themselves. I mean, small examples, you know, a lot of these companies have existed on business travel. Well, we know that business travel is probably not going to end up looking the same as we come out of COVID, no matter what. You know, people now have discovered Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Google Hangout, and, you know, do you really need to get on an airplane all the time? So we know that the corporate travel and corporate business, you know, for the hospitality industry is going to be hit pretty hard, and it's probably not going to come back to the level it ever was. So how are these companies going to reinvent themselves to cater more to a leisure, you know, travel segment? You know, for years, the hospitality industry talked about keyless entry, you know, go through, you know, like a process where you never had to look at somebody, and, you know, you can go straight to you can pick your room and you can go all the way to your room, you know, but there was always a lot of, you know, friction about doing that because it involved investment. Guess what? The hospitality companies of the future, they know they need to do that. So, you know, going back to this, you know, topic of innovation, you've got to unleash that innovation across the entire, you know, universe of your population. And, you know, to echo Al's point, you know, you really got to flatten it, because these organizations have to learn how to operate in a new way. They need to, you know, be able to be very nimble and flexible. And so I think that this, in some ways, if you look for silver linings in what is obviously the worst disaster that we've had in, you know, centuries, you know, these are some of the lessons I think that we can learn as leaders, and the people that get that, and the leaders that get that and unleash that in their organizations are going to be well positioned, you know, going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think my perspective, leading a team in a company during the COVID life, has been a much smaller team, a team of 14 people, but a team nonetheless, has been kind of, I used to think of my role as a leader as very external facing, and obviously looking at my internal dynamics, but very in charge of the external elements and the external priorities. And I think the pandemic forced me to be extremely internal facing, which was for me a shift that was different, but also had its interesting moments, had things I really enjoyed about it. But, you know, it was taking care of employees and internal priorities and internal stakeholders in a very different and a very high touch way. So it's been interesting, and I think some of that will remain. So zooming out a little bit, a couple of questions, and we're just a heads up, we're going to go a little bit over because we started a couple minutes late. So I'm going to give us a tiny little bit of an extension. But so I think this is a question that, at least for me, from the student's perspective, which I know we have some folks with us, comes up often. And so zooming out to a little bit of a more abstract line of questioning, how do you view the difference between managing and leading? And more importantly, kind of how can folks who are managers or who are in a place of their career where they're starting to step into those roles prepare themselves to become leaders? Kind of what does that trajectory look like?
I think I'm a big believer. Oftentimes people say, hey, it's really important to have goals and focus on goals, and you sort of have a path that you're driving towards. I don't think that's necessarily bad, but you can see by the way the comment I just made, I think it's important not to get overly focused on goals. I think the evolution of being a manager to a leader is taking the time to understand the things that are meaningful to you, that give you energy. And it doesn't mean just doing things that only the things you're passionate about, because it's realistically in the business world and any organization, you're going to have days where you're doing things that don't energize you. But to seek out things that do give you energy and that are aligned with the things that not only are important to you, but that you think are just really drive you. Take early in your career the time to learn those things, explore, try different things. And as you start learning those intrinsics that really drive you, then you can start using that as a lens to look at the areas that you want to focus more on in a particular business or a career path. Because if you're focusing on the things that inherently give you energy day to day, you're going to have the resilience to basically grow and succeed. And I think the difference between a manager and a leader is a manager is saying, okay, here's like these goals, objectives, and here's how you're doing it and all that. A leader understands the direction. They understand direction. They may be some clear paths to get there, but there's also some ambiguity in how you get there. And if today's environment doesn't demonstrate that we're basically in an ambiguous environment, I don't know what does. So the leader has the clarity of understanding that you're going in the right direction, that you're going in the direction, but has the flexibility to understand, to Angel's point, to bring in different perspectives of how to get there. And it's that linkage to yourself and what are your intrinsic drivers that will give you the resilience, the grit to work through obstacles, to keep an open mind when you're working, to be creative, to be innovative, while at the same time progressing. So I really think, I hope it's not too amorphous an answer, but I think oftentimes, sometimes very senior leaders and sometimes young leaders get a little bit overly focused on, 1 year from now, I want to do this. 3 years from now, I want to do this. 5 years from now, I want to do this. 10 years, I want to do for this. And they're locked into that goal. And then you start getting like a tunnel vision and you miss opportunities, and or you become so locked into your goal that it becomes you're de-energized, because if everything's not going according to plan, you just feel like you're just, oh my gosh, you're just fighting an uphill battle. And what that does is it saps your resiliency. It saps your resiliency, and you just can't keep up the energy to drive through the things that are difficult. So I think that's like a fundamental. That's something that, as I'm advising, if I'm doing advice, coaching a CEO or coaching a senior executive or someone who's just come out of school, oftentimes the conversation centers around that.
I think to me, the big distinction really is leadership is really about, for me, it's about influence and inspiration, and that's where you need to, going back to Al's point, you need to think bigger, you need to think broader, you need to think, longer term, and not get stuck in the management side of things, which tends to be about controlling, short-term goals and short-term objectives, which of course you need to do, right? You can't become a leader in an organization unless you've done some of the fundamental building blocks, right? Because leadership a lot of times comes from the, authority that you get, or the, advancement that you get because you've proven yourself, right? So you can then start, putting out those bigger, hairy, audacious goals, if you will, right? The BHAGs. I think about the stuff that we learned last year at the Advanced Leadership Program, it's really, making that transition, where now you're building a coalition, so you really have to pull on different levers. And so you get opportunities to do this over your career, as you grow in an organization or as you change organizations, right? The other thing that we discussed a little bit is like this concept that it's not linear anymore. So you need to lean into things that will allow you to develop those leadership attributes that will get you, further ahead and be in a position to influence and to give people that energy. And again, to get the maximum that they, the best leader for me, got more than I was ever even capable of realizing what I had in me. So they really pulled on me to get me to give more and more, even when I was probably at the end of either exhausted or didn't feel I could do more. They challenged you, and they sort of painted this broader vision of who you could be and what we together as an organization could do.
Yeah, and thank you both. And you touched on a couple of different themes which I think are fascinating. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and feel free to answer in any order, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of, Al, you touched a little bit on this idea, or both of you touched a little bit on like liabilities, right? So like too much focus on the management side, or kind of getting locked into goals. And so I'd be curious, kind of what are other things that fall under this category of either blind spots that you think are you see often or have experienced? So blind spots, kind of liabilities that leaders should keep in mind. We all have habits, we all get into trends, we all get into that inertia. Love to hear a little bit about liabilities and blind spots. And then kind of secondly, this idea around change management, right? So like what are kind of, how do you view the role of leadership in terms of change management?
Great question.
I'll take the first one, Al, if you don't mind. I mean,
Go ahead.
We've done a lot of work over the years around, what we call derailers, right? And some people call them fatal flaws, right? And typically it's like the double-edged coin, right? I mean, we have things that we do really well, which we're good at, and in times of crises, we tend to lean in on those things a little bit more to the point where they can backfire against us. So what I've seen leaders do is, pivot towards the things that they're really good at, and sometimes that doesn't work because that's not what's required of the particular moment that, like the one that we're living in, for example. So I think that leaders have this ability to flex and I guess one of the things that I'm pretty passionate about is, leaders, whether we're starting out or whether we're, at 55 or even older, we can continue to develop over time. And so I think one of the things that I always looked for was, how curious was somebody and how willing were they to grow? Did they rest on their laurels, or were they open to new ideas and suggestions? And so, for me, that not getting out of your comfort zone is a good thing, even though it can be very hard and, really vexing at times, but it really is what ultimately helps you grow as a leader in an organization. So
I would say the second piece of that completely builds on what Angel said. Change leadership. Not all leaders are good at change leadership, and I'll share my perspectives. There's part like Egon Zehnder that we do as a firm in terms of how we do change leadership as a competency and other perspectives. But I fundamentally think that the first step of change leadership is courage. The individual, as an individual, you need to be comfortable with setting a goal or setting a direction that by definition, most of the individuals around you or the market or something are going to resist. So that takes some fortitude. It takes some fortitude. So we touched on authenticity, we touched on intrinsics, we touched on these things. So if you're going to be a change leader, the greatest change leaders are doing things and putting forth change and leading change that's very aligned with who they are, with really authentically the things that drive them, because then that gives you the energy and the resilience to drive through what is fundamentally, as they say, change is hard. The second piece is that piece of keeping your aperture open to what Angel mentioned. When you're leading through a change, there are going to be unknowns that come up that are not going to be expected. By definition, you're leading something to change, a transformation, so your organization's going to be in a different place. So if you are too narrow focused, too channel focused on what you're doing, and don't keep, if you will, your radar open, your frame open enough to continue to both integrate perspectives from other individuals, but integrate market information, data, other elements of information to continue to shape and craft the way your approach to the change and leading the change, more than likely you're going to fail as well. So there's that balance of passion, authenticity, alignment with your intrinsics that gives you the resilience and compels others to come with you. At the same time, not being too anchored in your way of doing things. Those change leaders tend to have those attributes.
Great. Okay, let's wrap us up, since I know we're a few minutes over. I have kind of two more questions that are a bit of a mix from other people and questions we've seen come in. So one is, what should leaders be thinking about, kind of given the heightened context currently around equity, diversity, justice, inclusion? Kind of what advice do you have, or what have you seen that from a leader that you particularly admire?
We're spending a lot of time on that right now. I just joined a major board of directors meeting a few days ago on this topic. It's complex. Okay, number one, this is complex. We all want to move to action, but in engendering a more equitable and diverse and inclusive environment, that takes a lot of self-reflection as a first start. So organizations at all levels then need to do some self-reflection. That's like a first step. Second, combined with that self-reflection and understanding, so really an education of yourself, of what an examination of what your perspectives are. Second, then, is that you do need to take action, though. And the leaders that have been most effective, as they literally, from whether it be an executive level or entry level positions, is that they demand diversity. They demand diversity. Now, the thing that some organizations that actually, we work with many large organizations that then see themselves today and they're like, oh my gosh, it's like we invested so much on diversity programs, whether it be for Black Americans or whether it be Latinos. And it's like, but how can we still be here? How can we not have more diversity in our ranks? That's where there's the combination of action, ensuring that you've got a diverse slate of candidates for a job, but then that's where you've got to combine that with an examination of your own unconscious biases. Because if you don't continually re-examine that, what ends up happening is, and the sad thing that we see is that as you go up in the ranks of an organization, again, the diversity starts falling off. It starts losing steam. And that comes from that lack of reflection and continued re-examination and reflection. So the most successful organizations do that. Regrettably, there's fewer examples that do it well than those that don't do it well. Suffice to say, one thing you asked I didn't get to, Natalia, is that what has definitively changed, and hopefully this is for the good, is that large organizations now, those of you probably in corporate governance heard of ESG, environmental, social governance. Now, in terms of the organization, Angel touched about it, your purpose as an organization now, the societal piece, that link to diversity, inclusion, the impact of society. I can tell you, in every major corporate boardroom and executive team, that the S, if you will, is the way we've talked about, is the S in ESG now has elevated to a point that is really good. I mean, it's really good. Hopefully this is sustainable and it's changed, but that's definitely part. So I'll stop. Anyways, that's some reflection.
I can add on that piece, Natalia and Al, is so I have a really good friend who's been working a number of years. He started a nonprofit. It's called Management Leadership for Tomorrow, and I'm happy to get you guys in touch with him. His name is John Rice, and had a great conversation with him with a number of the fellows from my program just recently. And what he talked about was two concepts. Number one is, do what you can to be an ally. If nothing else, be an ally, right? Because if you're not an ally, you're probably blocking progress from happening. So that's kind of table stakes, and that's something that we can all do, is we can be allies. But the second part is really, taking concrete action. So, he calls it about widening the lane, as opposed to, looking at it as a zero-sum game. So you can create opportunities by widening the lane for all minorities, not just Black Americans, obviously, but Latinos and other people of color. And one of the things that he's working on, which is really exciting, I don't want to get ahead too far because I'm sure he'll have further, but he's looking at coming up with a scorecard, like a certification, if you will. So you know how the buildings are LEED certified. You know, there's a whole push now with B corporations. I mean, he's coming up with something that's going to be really good. That, you know, he's already talking to the ratings agencies. So this stuff is going to be baked into ratings agencies. That's going to be a game changer because, you know, corporations are going to have to pay attention to this stuff in a way that, you know, if they don't do it, it's going to have some negative consequences on them. So, you know, I like the approach and the way that he's going, and I think it's got some real incredible potential if done properly. And there's already, you know, firms that he's working with that are behind him. And these are big firms. These are not small firms, but you got to move the needle on it with concrete action, concrete steps.
Excellent. Thank you. And finally, last but not least, and a couple of people asked questions related to this. So what kind of specific resources or advice would you have for specifically kind of college graduates, recent graduates, business school graduates? So any either readings, material, publications that you really subscribe to, or kind of particular recommendations in terms of ways that people can hone their leadership skills, either, you know, outside of work and in work, and kind of any advice you have for recent grads or imminent grads.
So a couple of things, you know, I think on books, you know, there's a ton of books, obviously. I think Al has referred to The Authentic Leader several times during this call. So I'll give a plug to Bill George, you know, and his work on authentic leadership and finding your true north. That's, I think for me, that's a great reading for anyone that's thinking about, you know, leading organizations. There's a woman that we did some work with named Erica Fox, who wrote a book called Winning from Within, which sort of gets inside sort of the different personality anchors that we have and how we might flex on them as we go forth. And then, you know, everyone's into podcasts. So I'll just plug one that I'm pretty excited about, which I think ties to whatever you do, called The Art of Happiness. And it's by Arthur Brooks, who used to run the American Enterprise Institute. And, you know, I think as whether you're a 20-something coming out of college or you're a 50-something or a mid-career, you know, whatever you do, you got to have fun. So you got to enjoy what you're doing. You got to be with people that energize you and you feel that you energize them as well, right? And so those are the things that I would counsel if, you know, and I've done that with my daughter. So, I mean, I'm not telling you anything that I don't think I've told her as well.
I'll add a recommended reading that's very old school, but very practical for leaders. It's a book written by, you know, one of these Harvard management gurus, Ram Charan and Larry Bossidy, who used to be a former GE executive and ran Honeywell. It's called Execution. Now, this isn't about authentic leadership, things like this. Is just really building block basics for running a business. I read it in the 90s, and to be honest, I still use it to this day in terms of just fundamentals, in terms of thinking about this. So that's sort of a building blocks kind of thing. It's not going to help you get insights on yourself or anything, but it's just a basic blocking and tagging, I think is wonderful. I saw some questions come in for those of you that are like saying, hey, Al, it's a tough job market. Al and Angel, it's a tough job market. I'm starting a business or whatever. It's like, how come I'm too young or whatever? Well, I can tell you just from a couple experiences. I started my first business when I was 28. Now, I had some experience in the industry that I started the business in, but I thought I knew everything. And boy, did I not know a lot. And learned a lot along the way. I have a 24-year-old that actually in the Bay Area that's been a part of it's been ups and downs with a marketing technology startup, right? What I'd say is that, listen, if it's given today's environment, say, I'm going to just go out and try to put something together. Don't worry about your youth. Don't worry about that you don't know enough. Focus on an area that you think is that you have a lot of curiosity about. Dive in, do as best you can. It may fail, it may succeed. Frankly, it's probably going to fail. Hate to say it, but most new businesses fail. But you're going to learn a huge amount. I say to my 24-year-old now, he's a comms major, and you know, again, didn't take a whole lot of business school classes and such. And it's like I share with him all the time. I'm so proud. It's like, son, you have a PhD in business. He's learned cash flows, capital structure, all this other stuff. And this was just from out there, just fighting, you know, selling, putting together something. So use it as it's a wonderful learning experience. This is the time that it's one time in your life now. You don't have family responsibilities, something like that. Go for it. Go for it. You'll learn a lot. And I'd say just in terms of more broadly, this flattening of the organization through COVID and the interaction and the communications goes both ways. Keep in mind that one thing is you have more access to individuals that you speak with, and that's great. So you can be open and such, but at the same time, remember, be respectful of those that the opinions of others, be respectful of those in the hierarchy. There still is a hierarchy. and being open and providing input at the same time, keep the listening open. Keep the listening open. It goes both ways. That's the one recommendation I would make.
Thank you. If I may add one more, I think in my personal trajectory, I took opportunities outside of work to really hone and expand a lot of leadership opportunities that I was kind of younger in my career, so they were not I wasn't in that space professionally at work. And it has helped me tremendously, because as I started to later apply for roles that had a much higher kind of leadership and set of responsibilities, I was able to pull not just from my professional trajectory, but also from a variety of other experiences, founding nonprofits, starting projects, leading other things that were kind of on the periphery of my professional world. So I always recommend to kind of recent graduates thinking through what are leadership positions you can take now. And they can look like anything from your place of worship to a nonprofit that's locally, to an advisory board for a startup that some friends are founding. It can look really broad, but all of those are experiences that add to your toolkit and add to your bucket and your narrative. So.
Definitely volunteer and join organizations. And just when you think you're busy, I'm sure you can find the time to make an impact in those. And the networks that you can build are amazing. And you never know how you might run into somebody later on when you do something like that. So I completely agree with you 150%, Natalia.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. And thank you for allowing us to run over a little bit. Thank you for those who stuck with us through a little bit of a late start, but it's been a pleasure chatting with you both. Thank you again for a really great conversation. These are very unusual and interesting times, and this topic is very, very pertinent always, but definitely more now. And so thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And thank you again to CasaCuba and to FIU School of Business and to all of you who joined us here on this Friday. So have a lovely rest of your day and a good weekend ahead, everybody.
Have a great weekend.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Of course, my pleasure.